for joining us today. I'm Alexandra Kraus, a survey statistician in the Population Division, and I'm joined by my colleague Evan Brassell, who's an assistant division chief in the Social, Economic, and Housing Statistics Division. We also have several subject matter experts with us on the call today, and we are pleased to release today's proof of concept for the Detailed Demographic and Housing Characteristics File B, or the Detailed DHCB. We're excited to provide you with the opportunity to provide feedback on this proof of concept, and we also look forward to your feedback. We ask that you please stick around until the end of the webinar if you're able to. After you close the webinar, you'll see a short anonymous evaluation survey. We want to ensure that this webinar meets your needs, so thank you in advance for giving us your feedback so we can improve future webinars. So first, we're going to start out with a quick background about 2020 census and some foundational information about the detailed DHCB and about the proof of concept. After that, we're going to dig into the proof of concept, and this webinar provides a detailed summary of what's in the proof of concept. So the Census Bureau conducts more than 130 surveys and programs each year, and that's a lot of data. However, today we're focused on the decennial census, which is legally mandated account of each resident that happens every 10 years. For the 2020 census, we asked about vacancy status or why no one lives there, tenure, which indicates if the house is owned or rented, relationship to householders, such as opposite sex, husband, wife, spouse. We also asked about sex, age and date of birth, Hispanic origin, and race. On the screen, you see the informational paper questionnaire that has most of these questions listed. The Census Bureau has already released many 2020 census data products. Most recently, we released the Detailed Demographic and Housing Characteristics File A, or the Detailed DHCA. It provides total population and sex by age data for approximately 1,500 detailed race and ethnicity groups and American Indian and Alaska Native tribes and villages. Today, we're going to discuss the Detailed DHCB, which has not been released yet. The Detailed DHCB is the companion product to the Detailed DHCA. And we try to keep the Detailed DHCB as similar to the Detailed DHCA as possible. Both of these products together are the successors to the 2010 Summary File 2 and the 2010 American Indian and Alaska Native Summary File. Here at the Census Bureau, our mission is to serve as the nation's leading provider of quality data about its people, but we must also protect respondent confidentiality. Before we publish the data, the Census Bureau must apply a process called disclosure avoidance to protect the confidentiality of respondents. Over time, more and more granular census data have been released, and advances in data science, more powerful computers, and externally accessible big data has increased the risk of identifying individuals from published statistics. To mitigate this risk, the Census Bureau implemented a new disclosure avoidance method for the 2020 census. This new approach adds noise or small random additions and subtractions to the collected or enumerated data. Through this proof of concept, we are seeking your feedback as to how you or your work will be positively, negatively, or not impacted by the implementation of this new disclosure avoidance method.
Thanks, Alexandra. So before we get into the proof of concept, I'm going to give us a brief overview of one of the upcoming 2020 census products that Alexandra mentioned, the Detailed Demographic Housing Characteristics File B, or in the slightly shortened version, the Detailed DHCB. So like Alexandra mentioned, this is the companion product to the recently released Detailed DHCA. However, while that product covered statistics on people, namely population counts and sex by age statistics, The detailed DHCB covers household level statistics, and these are statistics which are based on the detailed race and ethnicity of the householder. However, like the detailed DHCA, the detailed DHCB will provide data for nearly 1,500 detailed racial and ethnic groups, such as German, Lebanese, Jamaican, Chinese, Mexican, as well as American Indian and Alaskan Native tribes and villages like the Navajo Nation. Together, the detailed DHCA and detailed DHCB, like Alexandra mentioned, are the successor to 2010 Summary File 2 and AIAN Summary File products, although with some small differences. The main difference, like Alexandra mentioned, is that the noise infusion that will be demonstrated in the proof of concept. And also, we want to highlight that these tables, the production ones, will be set to release in September 2024. So as we talk about household statistics, I wanted to frame it as in the two tables that were set for release, namely the household type and tenure data. As we go through this presentation, you'll hear numerous references to household type and tenure. And when we talk about these are the full tables that people could receive. Household type covers family, non-family, and other living arrangement statistics, whereas tenure covers if the housing unit is owned, either with or without a mortgage, or if it's rented. These, like I mentioned, are the maximum table sizes. Alexandra will cover this in more depth as we get to the adaptivity of tables, but this is important to note as we talk through and mention some of these key topics as we go through the presentation. Another thing that we'll be talking a lot about, and the focus of this product, is race and ethnicity data. We'll refer to a few different things as we go through, but I wanted to cover what we mean when we say race alone or race alone in any combination. Race alone refers to those who report a single group. For example, a respondent might fill out the 2020 census and indicate a single detailed Asian group, Korean, for example, and they would be tabulated in the alone group. Race alone or any combination refers to those who report a single group and those who also indicate another group as well. Example, using this Korean that I mentioned earlier, it would be someone who indicated that they're Korean and perhaps Vietnamese. It could also be someone who indicated that they're Korean and Jamaican. Those would fall into the race alone or in any combination group. It's important to note that race alone represents the minimum number of people who identify with that group, whereas race alone or in combination represents the maximum number of people who identify with that group. So now I want to bring it back to what's being released today, which is the proof of concept for the detailed DHCB. So unlike what a typical Census Bureau release is, this is not a massive table package or a micro data file, but rather documentation and describing methodology and examples that you can expect to see when the full production data is released in September. This product utilizes data that has already been released from the detailed DHCA proof of concept. And for those who are familiar with that product, a lot of what you'll see in this is very similar. We built, like I said, like Alexandra mentioned earlier, we've built off what the detailed DHCA team has done to keep these products as similar as possible. One thing to note, though, is important that this product, like the detailed DHCA proof of concept, as well as earlier 2010 census demonstration products, have all used 2010 census data as the base and have noise infused to them. What this means is that improvements that were made to the 2020 census, namely changes to the race question or code list, are not reflected in this proof of concept, but will be reflected in the data that's set to be released in September. I also want to cover, I'm covering all the terminology up front, so please bear with me. A few more things we want to highlight here is we'll be referencing several concepts throughout both this presentation and the proof of concept. And I want to make sure that we're all on the same page when we talk about this. So first thing is we'll be talking about published count. These are the counts that are available currently on data.census.gov from the 2010 census. Noise infused counts are the counts that have noise infused to them based on the methodology that will be described in the proof of concept and in this presentation. We'll also reference differences between the published count and the noise infused count. So these are the differences between the counts you can see right now in data.census.gov and those same counts, albeit with noise infused. We also will reference the difference between a enumerated count and noise infused count. Enumerated count is the count before disclosure avoidance is applied. So these are unreleased estimates that have noise then infused to them, and we can use those differences to determine the amount of noise and the impacts of noise on the estimates. Let's see. And so this release is beyond just a single proof of concept document. There's actually several documents and tables included in this release. The proof of concept is the main document, which will provide written information on content, disclosure avoidance, data availability, data accuracy, and data inconsistencies. But alongside that will be detailed summary metrics, which provide an overview of data accuracy comparing enumerated counts to noisy counts by detailed racial and ethnic categories and geographic level. Tenure examples provide specific demonstrations of data availability and accuracy comparing 2010 published counts to the same 2010 counts with noise infused. To help further explain data availability, there are multiple visualizations, an adaptive design process and adaptive design summary visualization. The privacy loss budget allocation resource provides more information on the privacy loss budget allocated to each query, as well as more information on the disclosure avoidance methodology. And a frequently asked question resource summarizes some of the important information we received and some of the information based in the document.
Great. Now that Evan provided an overview of the proof of concept, let's dig into what we're requesting feedback on, which is the data product design and the disclosure avoidance settings. First, we're going to talk about data availability and adaptive design. Adaptive design determines how much data a detailed or regional group will get for a given geography based on their population count. Larger populations receive more granular statistics, for example, the full table shells that Evan presented earlier, and smaller populations receive less granular statistics, for example, a partial table shell. This slide shows the full and partial table shells. If a detailed or regional group is eligible to receive data, they would get one of the 4 household type tables as shown at the top, and one of the 2 tenure tables shown at the bottom. As you can see, all of these table shells include a total line. The total represents the total household count. And so for household type, that first table, it only has total, and it's called household type universe. That table only provides the total household count as well as the tenure universe table. And this kind of shows why adaptive design is advantageous, because the margin of error or level of noise infusion is set by geography. So for example, if you, for detailed groups, if they have a margin of error or a noise infusion of plus or minus 11 at the county, that applies to all detailed groups, regardless if the group has a few households or 250,000 households. So if all groups received the full table with plus or minus 11, then the data would not be accurate if there were only a few households, because you could be adding plus or minus 11 when there are a few counts. So adaptive design is advantageous because it considers the population to determine how much data the group gets to make sure the data support the margin of error. And it's also by geography. So for example, if we're just looking at the household type tables, a detailed group might get that full household type 8 categories table at the national level. They might get a partial table with only 6 or 2 categories for state A. In state B, they might get the universe only. It works the same for tenure, but tenure only has 2 different tables. So you either get the universe only or the full table shell, which is 3 categories. Now I'm going to show 2 of the graphics that are included in the adaptive design. This one is more complicated. It shows the adaptive design process. This is great for those of you who like the technical details because it really shows how this works. Right now, I'm only going to provide a high-level overview, but if you want me to walk through the entire slide, feel free to ask in the Q&A. And just know that we're going to continue to explain adaptive design over the next few slides. So first off, I want to know that going across the top and down the right in the green represents detailed DHCA, and then down the center in orange represents detailed DHCB. So what's unique about adaptive design for the detailed DHCB is the amount of detailed DHCB data a detailed or regional group receives is based on the detailed DHCA noisy total population count. So if we start up here on the upper left, if a detailed or regional group does not receive a noisy detailed DHCA total population count, then no data is published for detailed DHCA or detailed DHCB. If the group does receive a noisy total population count for detailed DHCA, it's going to undergo some processing, and then next that processed number, total population count, is going to determine how much data you get for detailed DHCB. But one thing to know is that interaction between detailed DHCA and detailed DHCB occurs before the last step of processing for detailed DHCA, before the tables are published, which means there could be some inconsistencies between detailed DHCA and detailed DHCB, mainly that there could be situations where the detailed DHCA count is suppressed, but you still get data for detailed DHCB. And that's because of where we make this determination at in the process. So now let's focus a little bit on this detailed DHCB process. Once we get that noisy total population count with some of the post-processing, we compare that to minimum population counts or thresholds, which I'm going to show on the next slide. Then we kind of have two different processes here. And the only difference between these two columns is on the left, it's for if the group only receives the household type universe and 10-year universe tables, which is total population or total household count. The right side is if you get those partial or full tables. Both columns are very similar, and it's also pretty similar to detailed DHCA as well. We do some processing, and then we publish the final tables. So I'm going to kind of skip over some of that processing, but note that we will come back to that in a few slides. This graphic, also included in the proof of concept, is great for those who are more interested in the outcome rather than the process. So this really tells you what data you will get. Again, the green highlight represents detailed DHCA total population counts, where the orange in the middle represents detailed DHCB. For example, over here, we have the detailed groups on the left and then the regional groups on the right. So for a detailed DHCA detailed group at the national level, if a detailed group has 470 people, they're going to receive the household type universe and 10-year universe tables, which again is just the total household count. If it's a detailed group at the nation and it has 6,971 people, it's going to get the full household type table and the full 10-year table. And you can repeat this process for detailed groups for sub-state geographies in American Indian and Alaska Native Hawaiian areas, or you can repeat that for regional groups at nation and state, or regional groups at sub-state. And what's kind of great about this is right now the detailed DHCA has already been released. So you can determine which detailed DHCB tables you would receive using the proposed proof of concept minimum population counts. You would do that by going to data.census.gov, finding the detailed DHCA total population count for a given geography, compare it to this graphic, and then see which tables you would get. Just remember that the proof of concept does not reflect the final 2020 decisions regarding the minimum population counts. Rather, this is the proposal, and we are requesting your feedback on it. So next, I'm going to revisit some of that data processing that we skipped on the adaptive design process, and I'm going to talk about detailed DHCB, which is very similar to detailed DHCA. So first, we enforce consistency for geographic equivalence. Geographic equivalents include coterminous geographies, and all that really means is geographies, different geographic levels that have the exact same boundary. So a great example of this is DC. DC is considered a state equivalent, a county, and a place. But all three of those geographic levels have the exact same geographic boundaries. So to be demographically reasonable, they should have the same count. But given noise infusion that adds and subtracts counts from the collected data, they could be a little different. And so we complete post-processing to ensure they do have the same count. In addition, some data undergo suppression. So when counts are close to zero and you add noise, the counts could go negative. We suppress negative counts, which are reflected in the published tables by an X in the table. Similarly, when adding noise, race alone counts can become larger than their race alone or in any combination count, especially when those counts are similar or the same. But like Evan mentioned, to be demographically reasonable, the race alone or in any combination count should always be the same or larger than the race alone count. If it's not, then we suppress it, which is also indicated by an X in the published tables. Detailed DHCA also implemented these processing steps. One thing to note though, is data is only published when a noisy count is produced. If a noisy count was not produced, you will not see it on data.census.gov.
Great, thanks, Alexander. So now I'm going to talk about data accuracy and margins of error, which we cover in pretty good depth in the proof of concept documentation. So a margin of error, we determine it the same way as the detailed DHCA product. So the amount of noise is set in advance, and we can use that to explain to users the impact of the noise on the enumerated count. For example, we know that at the nation and state level, 90% of the noisy counts are within plus or minus 3 for a detailed group. We call this the margin of error, or MOE. It's also important to note that the MOE is only applied to the most detailed table lines. So whereas we'll talk about some inconsistencies later, we try to enforce consistency within the table. So that means that noise is applied to most detailed lines, as you can see here in the owned with a mortgage or loan, owned free and clear, or renter occupied lines. And those lines are then aggregated up to calculate the total occupied housing units line. These aggregated counts do not have the same MOEs as the detailed lines because of the aggregation. As I mentioned earlier, it won't just be this proof of concept methodology document going out. We'll also have a supporting documentation. One of the supporting documents we want to highlight is detailed summary metrics. These metrics show the average difference between enumerated and noisy counts. This allows users to see the impact of this new disclosure avoidance methodology by racial and ethnic group, as well as by geographic summary level. These metrics also show what we've deemed outliers. So this is an instance where a noisy count is more than double the margin of error. For example, this document would show the percent of cases where the noisy count is plus or minus 6 if the margin of error was plus or minus 3. So that it's a little confusing, but the summary metrics do a good job of showing the impacts of the noise on average across all detailed racial and ethnic groups, as well as by geographic summary level set to be released in this product. As we mentioned earlier, this product, the detailed DHCB, builds off the detailed DHCA product. For example, we use the same margins of error for this product as the detailed DHCA product used. The difference, however, is that because this is 2 tables, we have to use a lower confidence interval, 90% as opposed to 95% for the detailed DHCA. What this means is that whereas the detailed DHCA product can say that a given estimate might be plus or minus 3 95% of the time, In the detailed DHCB product, it will only be plus or minus 3 90% of the time. This means that there will be more potential for outliers, and there'll be more cases that fall outside of the given MOE. It's also important to note that the detailed DHCB covers household level statistics and not population statistics. This means that it's already inherently a smaller universe, and that these MOEs represent a greater proportion of the cases and units. Also, the detailed DHCB is only household statistics, whereas detailed DHCA covered both household population as well as group quarter population. So lastly, I will cover some of the things that are mentioned in depth in the proof of concept documentation, but these are data inconsistencies and limitations that users of this product might notice. So as a starting point, remember that noise is applied independently across products and geographies. I bring up across products because, again, the detailed DHCB is built off the DHC or detailed DHCA. Groups that receive the detailed DHCA count are eligible to receive one for the detailed DHCB. Unfortunately, what that means is that there could be inconsistencies when comparing across products, but these inconsistencies allow for both products to protect the data as well as provide unbiased estimates. Also, because we preserve this random noise, we can quantify it and present this noise as an MOE so users can understand the expected difference between the enumerated and published counts. So one inconsistency that we'll talk about is the fact that there's two tables in the detailed DHCB product, household type and tenure. Each receive noise separately. So when counts are present on both, such as the householder count, they may not match. There are also instances where one table might receive a count, whereas another table has counts suppressed due to the reasons Alexandra mentioned earlier. The proof of concept covers these in greater detail and provides guidance for users to help them navigate these tables and their use cases. However, we are also soliciting feedback. So as you're going through these proof of concept documents and something doesn't make sense, please provide us information so we can help bolster our communication strategies moving forward. Another inconsistency occurs when aggregating data. Aggregating data can happen two different ways. One example is summing of detailed groups into a regional group. For example, if you were to sum each of the detailed groups that comprise the Caribbean Hispanic regional group and compare that to the summation of the regional count, they may not match. Another example is across geographies. Summing the counts for a given group across all states might not match the published national count. These inconsistencies are not unique to the detailed DHCA or B product, but were also present in the detailed DHCA. Excuse me. The last inconsistency I want to highlight here, and that the proof of concept covers, are mismatches between the detailed DHCA and the detailed DHCB. These could be instances where a count is published for one of the products, but suppressed in the other. This might happen if a population group or population was suppressed on a detailed DHCA, but they received a household count on B. There are other inconsistencies that the proof of concept covers, like certain instances where the noise infused count might result in a household count greater than the population of that given group as geographic summary level. This is implausible, as there has to be a greater population than households, but it is possible due to the impacts of random noise. There are other things that we want to highlight that might not necessarily be inconsistencies, but might look odd to users when comparing these products. An example is a very large population count, but a very small household count for a given group in a geography. It is important to remember that the detailed DHCA includes both the household population as well as the group quarters population, whereas the detailed DHCB is only looking at household statistics. Because these two products cover different universes, one being the total population and one being just households, we don't recommend creating derived statistics from these products. That being a common example would be an average. We don't recommend calculating an average using the population count from A to the detailed DHCB household count because the detailed DHCA count includes both the household and group chorus population. However, we will be putting out more guidance regarding some of these derived measures in the future as we release more of our 2020 census data products.
Great. So although we provided you a detailed summary of the proof of concept today, there are even more details in the proof of concept release package. As Evan mentioned, there are multiple documents. A great place to start is the resource called the proof of concept, which is written documentation. So we hope you have the chance to review those materials in more in depth, but regardless, we would love to receive your written feedback. Remember, the proof of concept reflects the proposal for the detailed DHCB, and we'd like to hear from you before determining the final 2020 detailed DHCB data product design and disclosure avoidance settings. That could include data availability, data accuracy, and those inconsistencies that Evan just covered. Specifically, we'd like to know if we released the final detailed DHCB using the settings in the proof of concept, would your work be impacted positively, negatively, or not at all? Please provide your written feedback by emailing 2020-DAS@census.gov by Wednesday, February 28th, 2024. You can provide something short and simple or long and complex. We'll take it all, so don't feel pressured to write a long, complex report. You can just send us an email with some of your feedback. And if you need assistance with your review or if you have any questions, please send them to the same email address and our team will be happy to assist you. We're going to take some questions in a moment, but we wanted to thank you for joining us today and also provide a reminder that we have a short evaluation survey that will appear when you exit this webinar. Your answers are anonymous, so please let us know how we can improve on future webinars. So with that, we are ready. If anybody has any questions that they would like to ask us, we are available to answer some of those questions now. You can look on your screen. If you look at the bottom, you should see a hand. You can press that to raise your hand. Just note that we'll have to call on you, and then we will also have to unmute your mic. So just it might take a second. And your mic will be unmute, and hopefully we can hear and answer your question. And I will check in with one of our subject matter experts. Matt, have you seen any questions come in the chat?
Everyone, thank you. I have not seen any questions come in the chat or the Q&A function.
Great, perfect.
I see one hand up from Matthew.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Yep.
Okay, good. Well, just a heads up, I'm unable to actually type in my question in the chat, so I'm just going to ask it, but others might be having that same problem too. My question is about the DHCA. It includes two categories for Black or African American. That has African Americans, and then it also has other Black or African American not specified. And I'm wanting to know if those are duplicates, like if they are a double count, or if they need to be separated into two separate categories.
Great, thanks for that question. We'll see if one of the subject matter experts, Rachel, Rachel or Allie, are you able to answer that question?
Hi, Alexandra. I can answer that question. So just to confirm, you were asking about the Black or African American not specified. So under, as you mentioned, under the Black or African American, we actually have three categories, three major kind of regional categories. We have the Sub-Saharan African responses, we have the Caribbean responses, and then we have a third one that's called other Black or African American responses. And in that category, there are two, which is other Black or African American responses specified and other Black or African American responses not specified. And in that not specified category, you have respondents who gave a response such as they selected exclusively the Black or African American checkbox. And so you do need to include that response in the total Black or African American population.
Okay, and so it's not duplicated, it is an individual category, correct?
That's correct, yes.
Okay, thank you so much.
Great, thanks for the question. If anybody else has a question, they can go ahead and raise their hand, especially if they're not able to access the Q&A portion of the chat. I am seeing a question in the chat. Will there be a future data product that will provide average household size or other traditionally user direct measures? Currently, we have the data product Crosswalk. This is a resource that's referenced within the proof of concept, but we do have that resource online, and that provides all of the tables that we plan to provide for the 2020 census. Within the detailed DHCA and detailed DHCB, we just have 4 tables proposed. That is the total population and sex by age. Those 2 tables are already released. And then the detailed DHCB includes household type and tenure tables. All 4 of those tables, of course, are repeated by approximately 1,500 detailed race and ethnic groups in American Indian and Alaska Native tribes and villages. Those were the only 4 products that we have planned for the 2020 census release by those detailed groups. We will have some other average tables, some of them by the major race groups. That is part of the Supplemental Demographic and Housing Characteristics file, or the SDHC data product. That data product includes 8 tables. 3 of the tables are averages. And like I mentioned, some of those are repeated by race ethnicity, but not these detailed groups.
And just to follow up on what Alexandra said, those are set to be released in September 2024 as well.
I am not seeing any other questions at the moment. We will give everybody a few more seconds to either write in via the Q&A portion or go ahead and raise your hand. Okay, great. Well, I'm still not seeing any other questions. Evan, do you have any final concluding remarks that you'd like to share?
Nope. Thank you everyone for joining us today and talking about this product. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us, especially via the email address that Alexandra provided, and we'll be happy to help. And just a reminder that the feedback goes till the end of February. So please provide feedback as soon as possible if you have any. Thank you so much.
Yep, the feedback is due February 28th, and we really hope to hear from you, even if it's just sending us an email response. And thank you so much for joining us today.
This
Thanks, everyone.
concludes today's webinar. Thank you for your participation. You may disconnect at this time.